so divided. Divided almost to the point where we're uncivil, depending on which side you live in. In reality, we've always been. And I'd like to take you back on a historic adventure to realize that social change, political change, economic change, human change takes a long time. And if we can get that idea, perhaps we can be a little less impatient with each other when we differ on a particular point, and a little more encouraging in the long run to find that, yes, we're all human beings underneath. So with that in mind, let's go back to the Founding Fathers. Now, in the beginning of the United States, I don't want to go back that far, we had two men of very different background and very different perspective, both of whom we count as Founding Fathers. Hamilton and Jefferson. Hamilton, coming from a commercial background, going to the state of New York and founding banking commercial interests there, and of course eventually becoming the nation's first official banker, Secretary of the Treasury. Jefferson, a landed aristocrat from Virginia, widely read, highly respected, and very humane. Now, at that time, there was very little that the two agreed upon. After all, Hamilton thought we should have had a monarchy. Jefferson thought the real wisdom of the nation resided in the crossroads store. Hamilton was afraid of what he called king mob, meaning ordinary people. And it's very easy at the beginning of the 21st century to realize that in the beginning of this country, of, by, and for the people meant of, by, and for one white man in 17, because the requirements to participate in government were so stringent as to include not only property owned, but a bank account as well. Now with that in mind, how did we get to the point where all of us now are encouraged to participate, whether we do or not? Well, the good thing about this last election is we got more out than usual. Unfortunately, our more is less in terms of percentage than any other democratic nation in the West. Be that as it may, let's take a look at the interests that divided the country then and how they came through. Before I do that, let me just highlight that voting, it took 50 years to get every white man a vote. Andrew Jackson. It took another 40 years and a civil war to get black men to vote, and then they were systematically denied it in a variety of ways. We won't go into it this time. It took another 60 years to get women the vote, and it took another 40 years to get the 18-year-olds to vote, even though they had been the bulk of our soldiers all the time. So now, we have a nation in which all the adults, theoretically, can participate. So that means of, by, and for the people now has a different meaning. But does it? Aren't there still attitudes out there that say some are born to rule and many are born to follow?
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everyone, for having me here to speak to you today. I know I'm here to share with you my story living with borderline personality disorder. But first, I want to tell you about a woman named Heather and how someone I've never met and never will meet has changed the trajectory of my own story. Something moves me to listen closer, deeper to her story, her voice. These are her words. Teach me how to live. After all the drugs, alcohol, abusive relationships, after sobering up and going back to school, after all the meds and misdiagnoses, and still not getting better, after all her efforts, Heather made one final attempt. She asked her counselor, "Can you teach me how to live?" 4 months later, in the winter of 2009, Heather became another statistic. Like me, and as Pat mentioned, she is one of the 70% living with BPD who attempt suicide. And tragically, she's also one of the 10% who died by her own hands. It is staggering. BPD has a suicide rate that is 400 times the national average. Her life is a tragedy not only because she has left behind 2 young children, and not only because her diagnosis was withheld, but also because she tries so hard to get people to listen. Her whole life restless to find someone that will teach her how to live. I cannot help but wonder how I am able to survive this debilitating disorder while others like Heather have not. I have been there too, wondering what happens when you don't know how to love yourself. What happens when ordinary objects become weapons and subway tracks lure you into salvation? What happens when 4 glasses of whiskey are the only way you know how to sleep, and your waking days are spent hiding in bathroom stalls, creating nooses out of belts? To my family, to my friends, to you, to those I cherish, those who were there when I could not love myself, I thank you for loving me anyway. Your love kept me alive when I couldn't survive on my own. But your love wasn't enough. I thought love would heal me. I thought faith would restore me. I thought hope would find me. And maybe it did. Maybe it kept me alive, but 15 years worth of internal contortions, intense pain, and battles that raged on in the privacy of my own head were no match for the virtues I tried so desperately to cultivate. 3 years ago, after intense, heartbreaking revelation, and a realization that contradicted my current reality and crumbled whatever facade I had built, 3 years ago, I began to destroy the one thing that kept insanity at bay, my marriage. My marriage began to crumble, and yet you still loved me. For you were my friend who peered into my eyes, saying you still believed in me. You were my brother, knocking on my door late at night to see if I was okay. You were my mom and my dad, insisting love above all else, no matter who I was and where my life would lead me. And finally, you were my husband, with tears streaming down your face, willing to let me go if it meant my happiness. But you, dear, tender, compassionate love, it wasn't enough. And that's when it happens. When all the love in the world tries its best to keep you afloat, and still love is not enough, you find yourself standing on a ledge, so afraid to hurt the ones you love even more, and at the same time unable to tolerate the torment of the person you become. And you ask over and over again, when love seems to fail, where is the answer? Even in the best conditions, love is not strong enough to take on the gripping, thorny reality of an untreated and undiagnosed illness. We want to live, and the majority of us are willing to learn a new way. After 15 years of therapy and medications there in the psychiatric unit of a New York City hospital, I received a diagnosis I've never heard before. Out of the 9 symptoms of borderline personality disorder, I had 8 of them, and it was only after receiving treatment specific to BPD that I began to learn how to live. Living did not come naturally to me. I had to learn things that seemed foreign to me, emotions that had actual names, and life, to my surprise, had structure, and I was able to weave myself around that structure. It was only then that I was able to open myself up to love that healed, a faith that restored, and a hope that I could share with others. But you see, the thing is, I'm only one person, and there are 18 million others out there just as well. We have living, wishing not to suffer in vain. There's hope, but the hope isn't turning into action fast enough. Because even though there is a new reality, a new cause for hope, that there is treatment